just wanted to check in about Solitary by Albert Woodfox. I'm about halfway through right now. So this book is a very point-by-point autobiography of Albert's life. From the time he was a child and where he was born and how he was raised and how he became involved in a life on the street, which led to him committing crimes, which led to him being put into prison, and his transformation through knowledge. And so he was able to meet with some members of the Black Panther Party and learn from them and start to understand systemic racism and how that affected his life. So the prison system essentially is set up unfairly, especially at the prison that he was mostly at, which is Angola, in Louisiana. He was constantly, their rights were being violated. There's no equity in prison. There's just corruption and a lack of respect for the inmate as a human being. And because Albert was involved with the Black Panther Party, he was singled out and, falsely accused of a murder that he did not commit, and there was no evidence to prove that he murdered this person, and yet he was convicted of it. And the inequity, the injustice of what Albert Woodfox went through is mind-boggling. It is so frustrating. It is so horrible. There are some really interesting aspects too, psychologically, of what being in solitary confinement did to him as a person and how it affected him emotionally, mentally. He talks about his bond with two other men and that friendship and that solidity and being able to trust them implicitly, he believes was a huge part of his getting through this experience without losing himself completely, which I think is a wonderful symbol of hope. And then I also really enjoyed so far a story of him teaching another inmate to read, because reading was a huge part of his prison experience and so important to him, to help him to have his routine be part of his day and to learn and to grow. Part of being in the Black Panther Party was a reading requirement, and so he continued that on in this life. So the prison system essentially is set up unfairly, especially at the prison that he was mostly at, which is Angola, in Louisiana. He was constantly, their rights were being violated. There's no equity in prison. There's just corruption and a lack of respect for the inmate as a human being. And because Albert was involved with the Black Panther Party, he was singled out and, falsely accused of a murder that he did not commit, and there was no evidence to prove that he murdered this person, and yet he was convicted of it. And the inequity, the injustice of what Albert Woodfox went through is mind-boggling. It is so frustrating. It is so horrible. There are some really interesting aspects too psychologically of what being in solitary confinement did to him as a person and how it affected him emotionally, mentally. He talks about his bond with two other men and that friendship and that solidity and being able to trust them implicitly, he believes was, a huge part of his getting through this experience without losing himself completely, which I think is a wonderful symbol of hope. And then I also really enjoyed so far a story of him teaching another inmate to read, because reading was a huge part of his prison experience and so important to him, to help him to have his routine be part of his day and to learn and to grow. Part of being in the Black Panther Party was a reading requirement, and so he continued that on in his life. It's hard to say you're enjoying a book like this because it's not really a book that you enjoy. It's not an enjoyable topic. It's not, it's serious, it's heavy, it's infuriating that people have to go through this no matter what they've done that you think they deserve because they're criminals. They don't really deserve to be treated to that degree. So we'll check in again when I get further in the book. Hey everyone, I just wanted to share I finished Solitary by Albert Woodfox, and I'm struggling a little bit with how to talk about this book, so bear with me here. So I think that I had a hard time reading this, and there's various reasons for that. One of them being that this is the way this book was written. This book is a testament, and it is Albert Woodfox, in his own words, telling his story with all the details. So he went into prison when he was very young for a ridiculously long amount of time. And he is describing the prison industrial complex in this book. If you need a case study of one African American man's experience with the prison and judicial system, this is what this is. He goes through all of the details of how he was wrongly accused, how he was left to a life of petty crime, how that led him into the prison system, and then how encountering the Black Panther Party was very empowering for him and really gave him the resilience to get through 40 years of solitary confinement. This book will give you that. It is detailed, it is precise, and it's very honest and straightforward in how it's told. I struggled to get through it, and I think the reason for that struggle was because I'm not a fact detail-oriented reader to this degree, and this is really what this book is. He talks about his own personal experiences and his emotions, but because of the nature of his life and living in solitary confinement and being, abused, lied to, falsely accused. So many things happened to him repeatedly in this story. That for me, I knew that he was free in the end, but getting through that feeling and getting through that journey with him was a struggle. And, you know, it's nothing compared to the struggle that he went through in the flesh going through this story. So, you know, I'm not in any way trying to compare those two, but I'm just saying in terms of a reading experience, this book is, to me, more of a document that you would consult for research, or, you know, if you really didn't understand how systemic racism is, this is a wonderful book to read, because it will show that to you. It will show you the repeated failings of the state of Louisiana to bring justice to the guard who was murdered in Angola prison, who Albert Woodfox was accused of killing, and who repeatedly, when it was proven that he wasn't even there, the state just kept stuck to its guns and said that he and a few other men were the ones. And they did that because of their wanting to control his involvement in the Black Panther Party. So there's a few wonderful stories of hope in here, and there was a beautiful bond between himself and two other men. They were called the Angola Three. And so there's a lot of wonderful things in this book to read about. And I would certainly encourage anyone, like I said, who's interested in a case study to read this book, because, you know, it's very clear. It's very clear. There's no other way to interpret what he went through than the horribleness of systemic racism. And also, he was very inspiring in his activism towards prisoner rights. And I think that that's an area that is a little bit obscure, maybe, that a lot of people don't know about, that there's like a whole sense of activism around prisoners' rights. But he was very active in that. He was trying to bring unity to people in prison, rather than there being this constant threat of violence and separation and accusation. He was trying to unify the other prisoners who were in jail with him, even though he barely saw them, because he was confined to his cell for 23 hours a day for most of his time in prison, most of his life, really. So, you know, very, very important book. A testament, a testimony, a important piece of an aspect of humanity that is so often ignored, because people think that criminals deserve to be perpetually punished and to have their human rights removed. And it's more complex than that. And it's not about good guys versus bad guys. It's about, you know, people who believe that they are allowed to abuse their power based on the way society has been structured. And so this is a really good place to understand that. So my first read for this vlog has been completed. I would say that this round 3 for the BookTube prize, is turning out to be the most challenging for me, because these books are all quite long in my group, and I really had to work to get through this book. This was the longest though, so I'm through the longest one, and I've now moved on to Sea People. and which I think is by Christina Thompson, I think that's her name, and Say Nothing will be the last one that I read. So I'm going to try to get through Sea People in 1 week, which will leave me a bit more of a time to relax into reading Say Nothing, but I have no idea. Hi everyone. I'm halfway through Sea People by Christina Thompson, and I like it. And Alba at Seriella mentioned, I think she read this book for round 2. She said that this book read like butter, and I tend to agree. It's a pretty fast read, a pretty engaging, quick read, and that's good because I don't think I've ever been as close to the wire as I am right now for BookTube prize reading. I knew at the beginning that these books were long and that I had to read pretty fast, and somehow, even though I've been trying to do that, I haven't been keeping as on track as I was hoping. So as I say this today, it is the 17th of July, and I have to have this book finished and Say Nothing finished by July 30th. So I need to get on the reading. Halfway through, and like I said, this reads quite quickly, and I've already started Say Nothing just because I want to make sure to get through both of them by the 30th. I'm hoping to finish this one this weekend, and then I will have Say Nothing to read for the reading rush and wrap it up in the few days before I need to submit my rankings. Yeah, I think this book is really interesting. It, covers the history of Polynesia. It delves into these colonial views versus the views of the native Polynesians living in Hawaii, living in New Zealand, living on Easter Island when they still lived there, and all the small islands in between. It's certainly educating me on an area that I did not know very much about, so I find it very fascinating. I'm enjoying the theories so far. I think that learning how people got it wrong is just as valid as learning any theories that they've come up with that are correct. And yeah, so that's my BookTube prize reading. I think a little bit of the momentum that I had for reading BookTube prize books has diminished a little bit in this last round, and not that I've had, these books have all been great pretty much. It's more just that I think the luck of the draw of which books I got just kind of overwhelmed me a bit. Maybe just a little bit of reading fatigue, and maybe just a feeling of wanting to read whatever I want and not having to be obligated. I think that's the feeling, but that's okay. I think I definitely want to see this project through, and I'll reevaluate when and if I sign up for next year to see if I want to reduce the amount of rounds that I judge, or stick with nonfiction or just fiction, etc. So for now, I'm just gonna kind of push on through, and I'll check in again when I finish Sea People. Hi everyone, I finished Sea People by Christina Thompson, and this was a lovely book. It was a lovely read. I enjoyed it. I think the parts that I enjoyed the most were her analysis of the integration of the indigenous ways of knowing into the European colonist mindset, and how that was a very empowering, obviously, aspect of the development of science, and also very empowering to the indigenous peoples, to the people living in Polynesia. I thought that this book was well put together. I thought she did a good job. It was, she kept things on point. She brought in very tiny snippets of her own life, but it wasn't really about her, so she kept herself out of it. When you're trying to learn about the reverberations of colonialization around the world, I think that this is a good book for you to read, because, this is about a whole area of the world that was populated for thousands of years by other people other than Europeans. And when the Europeans arrived, they of course inflicted their viewpoint upon everyone else, and came up with some crazy theories and imposed a lot of requirements on Polynesian people, like, you have to be this way, and you have to tell us how you got here this way. And what I love is that they didn't have to do that, that eventually science was able to show that you can navigate by the stars. You can navigate in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, this huge ocean, without using European made tools. You can do it in another way. It's a deep way of knowing. And I think a lot of Indigenous cultures have a very embodied knowledge and a very embodied intelligence and way of living on the earth that is, in my opinion, superior to the European way, because the European way has caused so much damage. So in terms of climate change, in terms of progress, in terms of just denying a connection between the body and the earth. So a lot of great stuff in here, and I think it was a great read. And now I'm moving on to Say Nothing. I have a week and 2 days to read this Say Nothing. I've only read a few pages. Certainly down to the wire this time. This is the most down to the wire I've ever been. I've never been this, just starting the last book this close. I think the length of the books got to me. Also, I just kind of got stuck there mid-month where I was struggling to read, just struggling with reading. I just wanted to, I was getting rebellious and feeling like I just wanted to read whatever I wanted. I didn't want to be told what to read, which is interesting because, the first 2 rounds, I really didn't feel that way. So I think it was just, just a mood that I've gotten into. But I pushed through, and See People is checked off, and I will read Say Nothing, and I will submit my ballot. I'm probably gonna have to wait till pretty close. I'd like to get Say Nothing done finished by the end of the weekend, and then I can submit my ballot on Sunday night or Monday. So that is that, and I will check in again when I'm about halfway through Say Nothing. Hello. Okay, I'm just over halfway in Say Nothing by Radden Keefe. And I have struggled through this book so far. Sorry, it's dark. I'm gonna turn the light on. What to say about this? There are so many trigger warnings in this book that I don't feel like I can remember all of them here to list them for people. I'm gonna do my best. Trigger warnings for extreme violence, anorexia, child abuse, sexual abuse, murder, kidnapping, racism, This is done in a reportage style. There's lots of praise for this book. There's lots of, and I understand on a couple levels why people think this is good. It's done in a style that is in some cases too objective for me. On page 69 of this text, there is a blatantly racist statement that he quotes from a man who was part of the British Army. And he gives no context for it. He gives no commentary. He gives no kind of space to contextualize this for anyone who is a Black person or an African person to, you know, it's just this blatantly racist, white supremacist person, military person who talks about his extreme violent tactics. There's torture in this book. I mean, yes. Did I know it was about the Troubles in Ireland? I did. Did I know that this was a bloody and horrific conflict? Yes. Did I know that this book was going to be solely about that, though? I don't think I did. And so, for me, this is not enjoyable. I mean, it's not supposed to be enjoyable to read this, but I don't want to read a 400-page book that reads like an action movie, because that's what this is. This is constant action. This is bombing to bombing, shooting to shooting, prison sentences, torture, beatings, like rogue citizens who just beat people bloody for political reasons. This is white supremacist structure in how to suppress uprisings. This is violent protest. This is peoples who dedicate their lives to a cause and die, whether by hunger strike or murder by their own organization for not following the rules. Without making this go on and on, I would not be reading this book if it was not for the BookTube prize. This is not the type of historical book that I can digest well or consume well. If you would like to learn about the Troubles and not go through something as traumatic as this book, then I would recommend reading Milkman by Anna Burns. I don't know who the audience for this book is supposed to be. I feel like, I mean, the author is nowhere to be found in this book, so this is not a case of a writer who writes from their perspective, you know, talking about their research, talking about their involvement in the story. He is not here. He is not. It is all about the characters, the prominent figures from the Troubles that he felt were important to list. There are so many names, so many types of people mentioned here. Don't expect to keep track of everyone. If you have previous knowledge of some of this, then you would probably have a different experience of reading it than I'm having. But you know, especially right now when I'm doing a lot of work around white supremacy, white privilege, dismantling those things. Reading a book like this that is steeped in white supremacy, it is about the military and political maneuvering of the English government versus the Irish Republic versus the IRA versus other factions of people trying, who some of which are fighting for freedom, some of which are fighting for control. The nuance of that, it's all in here, you know, but the focus on the violence is so overwhelming to me. I can't really absorb much of the nuance, much of the effect of this. There was one beautiful passage just now of a mother speaking about her son who was disappeared by the IRA, I believe. And it says, quote, I used to just get into his bed and wrap his clothes around me to see if I could just sleep and dream that I could see him, she recalled. I thought that was heartbreaking. There's a lot of heartbreaking scenarios in here. Children being, their parent was kidnapped, and then they were alone, and then they just run wild for months before anyone intervenes to try to help them. I mean, it's honestly, it's too much, in my opinion. I feel like maybe there would have been a way to write this book that wasn't as traumatizing as it is. If you are a person of color, a Black person, if you suffer from any of the triggers that I've talked about, I wouldn't recommend reading this. I don't really have those traumas in my life personally, and I'm finding this difficult to consume because it's constant. There's no break. So I will finish this book, and I'm hoping to finish it by Sunday night, by the end of the reading. I'm doing the reading rush right now, so by the end of the reading rush, I have about 130 pages left. And the rankings are forming up pretty clearly with this read. So I don't usually reveal my rankings in the vlogs, but I think it's safe to say this one's my bottom. And that's not because it's not written well, but I just don't know how anyone can consume this book and not feel completely overwhelmed by the amount of violence in it. So I'm gonna check in with you again when I finish the book, and that will be the end of round 3. Hi everyone. So round 3 of the BookTube prize. I can't say that my feelings really changed that much about the book in finishing it. What I said before pretty much stands. I read some of the notes after the text, and Radden Keefe talks about how this is not a history book. It's a book of narrative nonfiction. And for me, when he said that, it just reinforced to me that it's not a book that was written for my taste in reading nonfiction. And I also didn't find that Radden Keefe had any sort of point of view he was trying to get across. It was really, he took 4 prominent figures from the Troubles: Jerry Adams, Brendan Hughes, Dolores Price, and he told their stories in the best way that he knew how. And I certainly learned a lot reading this book, because it certainly tells you a lot about the world at that time and what was happening. I don't really want to go into spoilers here for this. I mean, can you go into spoilers with nonfiction? I don't know. I would certainly love to talk to someone about this book who's read it, because I feel like my perspective is maybe not skewed, but I just don't really think that there was a overall theme or message in this book. other than the fact that Ireland went through so much pain around this issue and it's still there. I guess that's his main point, is that this happened 50 years ago. There are still unsolved murders. There's still unsolved questions. There are still people denying their roles for their own benefit. There was a lot of pain and suffering that was inflicted and that also was endured by the people who had inflicted that pain. There's just so much willingness to ignore and not talk about it, but that's in a lot of ways that's because, you know, this was a conflict with two sides, and somehow people only want retribution against the IRA side and not against the British government side, because they don't want to admit the extent to which they participated in the deaths of so many people. I wouldn't recommend just anyone read this book, as I said. I think if you are someone who lived through this, and someone who has gone through traumatic situations around people being disappeared, violence, I just wouldn't recommend reading this. I think it's very triggering. It's very, very triggering, because it is like an action movie. So you're basically going from violent thing to violent thing. So keep that in mind before you read this book. And I will be back with a ratings video to tell you where I'm going to place all these books. And thank you so much for following along the vlogs. And yeah, thanks for watching.